Hey everyone, welcome to a very special episode crossover. It's a crossover. It's crossover between Mastering the RPG and Tabletop Tango. We got a question on Mastering the RPG from a listener, Richard, who asked a number of questions about Savage Worlds, and we decided they were great questions, and they made so much sense to be a Tabletop Tango episode. We decided that's what we're going to do. And we're going to bring on all the hosts from Mastering the RPG, Carl, Eric, and Chris. And we're going to go through, answer the questions, and it'll be a special episode for both sides. And we'll see how it goes. You guys ready?
Worlds collide.
Hey everyone, this is Carl with Eric and Chris, and this is Tabletop Tango and Mastering the RPG. If you're watching the video, look at the bubbles, do the stuff. If you're not watching the video, then go to masteringtherpg.com, and you can learn all sorts of stuff, and you can send us email at gamemaster@masteringtherpg.com. If you're on Tabletop Tango, it's tabletoptango.com. So there's a lot of stuff here. It's a crossover episode. So, hey, gentlemen, should we just jump right in and start answering these questions? What do you say? Okay, so one of the questions is, other than Tabletop Tango, which you're listening to, where can I go to familiar myself with Savage Worlds core rules and Savage Rifts in particular? So what do you say, Eric? We'll start off with you.
Oh, okay. Well, on the Savage Rift side, I mean, we definitely get requests to do Savage Rifts every once in a while. I would love to do more Savage Rifts content, but unfortunately, I just don't get a chance to play that many. I played a lot of Savage Rifts, but that was old edition. That was in Swex. So I just haven't gotten a chance to play a lot of new Savage Rifts. And Savage Rifts is such its own thing, you know. But I could always go through options. I mean, it's easy for me. So if people really want, you know, Savage Rifts content, leave stuff in the comments saying you want to know maybe some archetypes or whatever, or basics, things like that. But as far as learning about Savage Rifts, there really isn't a lot of podcasters doing it for sure. I think the best way is probably to watch some actual plays. Happy Jacks did a very good, like, I think it was like 20 episodes, but I believe it was for the Swex edition. So, you know, there's a lot of similar rules, but obviously it's for a different edition, but you also get kind of a feeling of the setting. But if you already know the setting, I believe Dungeon Musings also did. Yeah, Dungeon Musings did like a pretty cool one, I think, in conjunction with Peg. But it was only like a 3-parter, but that's with the newer edition. So I would check out Dungeon Musings for you know, to get your idea with Rifts.
And if you want a good, just general purpose podcast, actual play, I think Knights of the Smith Dinner Table, they've done a lot of stuff that's really good, fun to listen to for sure, and that showcases the system nicely. So, Chris, what do you think? You got any places that people should be checking out?
I don't have any like podcast video type of things, but savagerifts.com and their Discord server is very good for information. And I work with some of them at Metamorphic who run that server. So the BTT, crew for the conversion team is high density of Savage Rifts players. So either one of those servers really. But yeah, the Savage Rifts Discord server is fantastic.
All right.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. On that note, the unofficial Savage Worlds Discord, which has a Rifts component too. So for just general Savage Worlds and also for Rift, it's a very active Discord. So that's a good point, Chris.
Yeah, and what's kind of bummer is there used to be some good
forum
swayed podcast out there that I just can't find anymore. There was the Wild Eye Savage Worlds GM podcast, and I just can't find them on iTunes. So I think they just let their hosting lapse, and that's a shame. But if you somehow run across them, those were kind of fun shows that talked a lot about the rules as well, which actually that's part of the reason I started Tabletop Tango was some of those podcasts were sunsetting. I said, we still need Savage Worlds content. So any other thoughts on that one? All right.
I mean, there's a ton of good videos out there for Savage Worlds rules, but nobody really goes into it as much as us, honestly. But we tend to go maybe deeper than people want at times too. So there's definitely some good overview videos that with really high production that other people do. But as far as like getting into topics very specifically like we do, you know, things like that. That I don't think there's really many other people doing that.
There was recently also the Savage Rifts Con, the online convention, and they did stream some of their stuff, which is on YouTube, I believe, if you just want to watch them play.
It feels like we need to do some pull some links together and put them in the description after the fact, so people can find all this good stuff. So so number two question, same in vein as number one. Do you or others acquaintances run any learn to play for Savage Worlds? They say they got the core book, but it would really help tremendously just to play through it. That was a tough one for me. I do know that there's lots of times in our Savage Worlds on Reddit, they have a looking for group post that comes up every now and then. On Roll20, they actually have really good looking for group. I think it's really, I found a lot of players through their
on Roll20 specifically. There's a Roll20. It's like a game. I forget what it's called. I'll put the link down there. It's basically a game that you can join, and then within that game forum, there's tons of people posting for games in Roll20. So yeah, that's definitely a good resource. Yeah, I'll post it in the comments.
Yeah, and I haven't used that. I've just used the looking for a group feature, and that alone was pretty cool. And I looked before we made this video, and there was at least 6 or 7 games looking for players for Savage Worlds when I took a look. So Chris, you got any places that you think are good places for someone to learn if they want to get into a game and learn?
Yeah, mine's going to be the same as my last answer. It's the Savage Rifts Discord server. They often advertise games, and so every time I've been there, they've been more than happy to onboard somebody who hasn't played before. So I don't think that would be an issue.
Yeah, I just on top of that too, like just as we said before as well, the Savage Worlds unofficial Discord has also a good place besides Reddit. But I think in general, I think the person's asking like, is there a good place for me to run through the book to learn the game? I would say that, I think overall to the tabletop community, the role-playing tabletop community is it's a pretty open community, and I think especially with Savage Worlds, in my experience, every time I've been in the Savage Worlds game, there's never been a problem with wanting new players into Savage Worlds. People are very open. Like personally, I have taught a lot. I feel like I've taught a lot of people how to play. Like even in the game I just did, 3 of the players are completely new to Savage Worlds. So I think we're all game masters. I don't think any of us have any like hesitation with new people to Savage Worlds at all. And learning as you play. It's very easy with Savage Worlds to learn as you play as well. So I just think, honestly, you don't need maybe a specific game that's like a one-shot for new players. I think most of the time people with Savage Worlds aren't really running those as much as like, say, D&D, where there is a lot of like those, I'm just doing it like a module for new players, right? I think certain conventions, online conventions and in-person conventions handle that. But besides that, I think just join like a one-shot or join like a small campaign or something, and people will walk you through it, I definitely think that the core book... Yeah.
I feel like that would be a good Patreon type thing or something
for sure.
Yeah. So tell us in the comments. Do you think that makes sense? Should that be a Patreon item? Just let us know. So I don't know which side it would be on. Is that a Mastering the RPG or Tabletop Tango? But who knows? So.
By the way, so the Roll20 directory to find games, it's actually a game that you can join. It's called Roll20 Savage's Savage World Directory, and there's 194 people in it. So I've actually found a lot of games on Roll20 through that. I don't really play in Roll20 anymore, but it's a really good resource for Roll20.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I definitely check out that link too, because I might be trying to start another campaign too, and it'd be great to find some players. So, all right, cool. And then number 3 that we had is, in your opinion, would it be better to try for a more standard Savage World setting? If so, what's your go-to? I wasn't sure if the previous Rifts experience would be a help or a hindrance. Well, Rifts is pretty gonzo. So from learning Savage Worlds and getting a setting, that's you've got a high bar. You're shooting for the moon. You're going after Rifts right away. So I think things like, if you want high tech or something, I would just start with the Sci-Fi Companion. And honestly, I've run science fiction games just with the core book. It's been sufficient. Now you don't get cybernetics, you don't get mechs, you don't get spaceships and stuff like that. But the core rulebook covers a lot, and the hindrances are good, the edges are good, it covers a lot. But I think that new sci-fi companion is a great place to start as a companion book. But there definitely are lots of setting books out there for different games. So I don't know if you guys are more in the setting space, or what do you guys think?
I think you're right on with the sci-fi companion being a great place. Also, Rifts, everything is dialed up to 11 in Rifts. I would not say that was a good spot to start for anybody. The core book does a ton. The sci-fi companion, any of the companions are like adding stuff, but the core book does everything you really could want it to do, especially if you're learning. No reason to like add too many variables.
Yes, I think so your previous experience with Rifts is certainly good for understanding the lore of Rifts, and that's about it. If you haven't played in Savage Worlds before, so Rifts itself is actually, I wouldn't say it's the most complicated from a character creation standpoint. There isn't a ton of new rules per se. It's more like basically playing with superheroes, but you're just given a ton of stuff and a ton of custom stuff up front. So it's not like there's a ton of extra rules. You're just given, like, instead of starting as like a basic character, you're starting with a character that has power armor and missile launchers or a dragon with two different types of magic, right? And, being able to teleport and blah, 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 going on and on and on. So there's a lot of like character stuff thrown at you right away. I think that's the more complicated part. It's not too bad from like just a purely rule standpoint. There's not like a ton of custom setting rules. I think more people with Rifts, what they have a problem with is, number one, like I said, the amount of stuff that you start with, because you basically start as I forget what the like a mid-range superhero, like a 45-point superhero. That's kind of the general power level of that. And also the lore is really hard for people. So if you have the lore, you actually are halfway there. But I agree with them that you definitely want to start with either core Suede or, science fiction companion. I mean, I think the person is asking about like what setting to join. The cool thing about Savage Worlds is that you can play any setting with it. A lot of the setting books, there's some of the official settings, but a lot of the setting books have not really been updated to Suede yet, even though Suede's been here for a while. So there's a ton of settings for Savage Worlds. Something like Deadlands might be really cool, I think, if you want to start, because again, there's extra options for you to choose from, but you're not given a ton of stuff at the start. I think that is the biggest, for any new Savage Worlds player, the biggest kind of hurdle is if you come from like D&D or Pathfinder or something, that the amount of options available to you when you like level up, right? And when you add in a companion, those options increase because there isn't like classes. So another one I would also recommend is Savage Pathfinder, because it's easy into like, a familiar fantasy setting. And also you're kind of, you can just play with the class edges, and that's it's an easy thing to get behind of like, how do I level up, right? You can kind of get behind like that archetype, but it's much more limited than Savage Rifts. I don't know if that made sense. It was kind of a long-winded answer, but yeah.
I usually do both of those. There's usually two sets of people who are coming in from other games that I've noticed. And that's one that wants to stay familiar with fantasy, at which point I recommend Savage Pathfinder, just like you did. And then there's one that thinks that if it's too close to fantasy, then they're just going to naturally want to gravitate back to D&D or whatever they played. And those people, usually it's Deadlands that's better, because they're, it's just different, and they won't like habitually try to do different things that they're used to.
Yeah, I think those are the two probably best settings. Like Deadlands was original, Savage Worlds came from Deadlands. That's what it came from. So a lot of the kind of mechanics, even though it is they've done a good job of making it, genreless at this point, there still is that Deadlands kind of flair in the DNA, right? So, mechanics are often easier when they're combined with flavor. So I think that is a very easy way to get behind the rules of Savage Worlds, of like, we're doing initiative with cards. That makes sense because it's poker, right? We're throwing out poker chips like that. It just feels good with Deadlands, I think. So yeah,
that's a good place to start. And if you want a little more high-techy, you can go Deadlands Lost Colony, which is still Deadlands, but got that Fire 5 vibe that people like, for sure. So there's just a ton of settings for almost, there's the After if you're looking for post-apocalypse. There's Wise Guys if you want to be a made man in the casino business. There's Boy, there's just a lot out there that you can
play. You can play Fallout with
you can play Fallout.
homebrew Savage Fallout that somebody maybe have created on this channel now.
Yep. There's a Savage Everon too. So maybe we'll put a link in for that game that person was talking about. I hear it's popular. I hear it's popular. So we'll get the link in there. So, all right. So cool. So I think this is the big question. Number 4. How do you avoid burnout as a GM? I think I tend to be too much of a perfectionist and spend way more time on prepping than is ever actually necessary for people to have fun. Oh, this is a good one. How do we avoid GM burnout? I'm going to throw this one to Chris right away and let him answer that one before I jump in.
I think in order to same way you avoid burnout with lots of other things, I think, is you vary things and change it up. And I think becoming a player if you can, playing a different game if you can, or GMing a different style game or a different system that you're used to. Anything that gets you out of that routine, or the stuff you're doing, it's the same all the time. Like I went from 5e to Savage Worlds a few years ago. And then Deadlands was a good, switch from fantasy, and that kind of gave me new ideas. So I think anything that really changes you up is super helpful.
Yeah, we actually did a whole episode on mastering the RPG on avoiding GM burnout. So also check out that.
Yep. I don't know the episode number, so you'll just have to start listening from the beginning until you get to it.
I mean, I would say specifically for Savage Worlds, because I'm kind of looking at this through a Savage Worlds lens. I mean, there's a ton of good information on general stuff, but specifically for Savage Worlds, I think one of the strengths of Savage Worlds is its many narrative systems within it. So as Chris was saying, like switching it up, that's also for Savage Worlds, you can really leverage that. Savage Worlds doesn't just have the combat, right? It has things like social conflicts, chases, dramatic tasks, interludes. All that stuff makes it, at least when I play as a game master, using those different things does keep it fresh in a way, right? It does kind of like stop it from just being like role-playing to combat, role-playing to combat, role-playing to combat, or exploration to combat, right? So specifically for Savage Worlds, that's what I would say is really use those systems that they have in place that are really well developed, right? That's one of the strengths of the system itself. Also, I think quick encounters are a really good way, so you don't get bogged down and slow the narrative kind of zone that you're in. I think often a lot of GM burnout might come from like, oh, we're exploring, this island, we got trapped there for whatever reason, and just like constant battles, right? Constant just battles that don't matter, or, whatever it is, like using quick encounters is a really good way to like, okay, we're just getting the small stuff. Like there's combat happening. Yeah. But it's not like, we're not taking up all our time doing it. I want to get to like the narrative points that I want to get to as a game master. So yeah, utilize quick encounters.
Yeah. And reading the question, spending a lot of time on prep, that can burn you out for sure if you're just way too much time. And the nice thing about Savage Worlds is you can get away with a lot less prep, in my opinion. First off, there's not CRs where you spend a lot of time trying to balancing. With exploding dice, balance is really hard to get. So just pick what needs to be there and what makes sense narratively, and let the fun happen. If you've got NPCs, you don't have to go and do complicated stat blocks. You can just go give them D6s down the line, and then if they're good at something, give them a D8. And if they're really good at something, give them a D10, and then you can forget about edges. Just give them what they need to be to, if you want them to hit somebody before they hit them, well, yeah, sure, that's actually a real edge, but you don't have to think of the edge. You can just think that this is something that this person can do. And then I also found that from a prepping standpoint, if you're not familiar with the Lazy GM, has a lot of ideas on being lazy as a GM, and kind of puts a framework in place to rapidly build out. And I've used some of this stuff. I don't use all of it, but there's a lot of cool stuff like defining secrets and clues, picking a fantastic location, and then just kind of bulleting out the scenes that may happen. So you're not spending all your time with, don't spend a lot of time with like call out boxes and stuff like that. It's just really kind of, you're almost creating a one sheet. A Savage Worlds one sheet to kind of get into your adventure, and that's all you need really to do it. And then, for prepping dungeons and stuff, just check out the 5-room dungeon concept. It just takes you step by step to create a 5-room dungeon that has, I sometimes creativity, by limiting and putting a box, your creativity is greater because now you're not just blank sheet of paper. So check out the 5-room dungeon, which, by the way, there was an episode on Tabletop Tango about the 5-room dungeon and how it applies to Savage Worlds. So you could check that one out. Just push them in there. It's not just a cross episode; it's a cross promotion within. So yeah, cool. Any other thoughts?
And so as I was saying, all those narrative systems I was talking about that's in Savage Worlds, the cool thing about them, and this goes to like the whole prep thing of, over prepping or not prepping, is you don't have to prep for most of those. Like it's often you can take up time in the session having fun and like being rich with the narrative, but like with a dramatic task, you're not setting up a whole map with tokens, right? With a social conflict, it's all about the role playing. You don't have to have a lot of maps or whatever. Chases even, like you're putting down cards and there's exciting things happening, but you don't have to have another custom map, right? So some of the prep you can do is like just having your like chase, map set up like a street, like or something, right? I'm doing a nautical game. I have like an ocean. And I want to say as a counterpoint to Carl, though, as kind of a little counterpoint, but his advice was absolutely spot on as far as enemies. One thing that I like to do, Savage Worlds makes it very easy to make creatures, right? Like Carl was saying. Even if you wanted to give them special abilities and edges and all that stuff, if you're doing it through a VTT, it is so easy and so much fun to create custom creatures. So when I start a game as a game master, like my new one that I'm doing, I have a couple different factions, and I will make, it's pretty easy to do. I'll make like a bunch of the creatures ahead of time with different the more like goons and the more tough ones, and I just have them ready to go. So if something happens with the players, I can just pull out those monsters that fit that theme and just have it ready to go, right? So you can really, what I mean by that is you can really like the time that you're spending prepping of making monsters that are really 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 like or creatures or people, whatever, that really makes sense to the setting that you're running. Like my game, I have pirates, so I made a whole different types of pirates, and they have themes with them, right? And so it fits the setting itself. After that, I don't have to do any more prep. I can just pull out like a ship and just like throw on different pirates that have different abilities because it's all like preloaded, right? Does that make sense? What I'm trying to say.
And you mentioned that a lot of the virtual tabletops with the drag and drop and makes it so much more easy. Thanks, Chris, for all that help that you provide.
Oh yeah, thanks, Chris.
It was all me too.
Yeah, all you. Yeah. So that's something that I would recommend, is that prepping will never go to waste, and I think it really is a very enriched experience for the players when you have custom built monsters that are and like everything that Carl said was true, right? I will give them edges because it's easy to drag and drop, and give them what's called creature abilities or
monstrous abilities, I think, or something like that. It's called.
Yeah, it's in all the core books. Like there's like specific abilities like fast regeneration or trample, things like that, right? That you can just drag on, and I'll give creatures edges, but I'm not concerned with their seasons or whatever. Like that doesn't matter, right? But we just want like like you said, it makes sense to have first strike or improve first strike or whatever. So yeah,
cool. Chris, you got any last thoughts, or I'll jump on to the last question, which is pretty cool.
I do have one, just real quick one, is that if the prep part is a little bit cumbersome, if you turn to focusing on the character backstories and building it out that way, you could put some of the onus on creation onto the players.
Good point.
And take it off of you and explore it kind of in that direction.
Very cool.
I think we have a lot more to say, but we did like a full hour episode on this. So,
yeah. Again, check it out on Mastering the RPG. And so the fifth question and final question is for this very special episode is, what are the hazards to avoid and the best parts of running in the Savage World system specifically? So who wants to jump in on that one? There's so much good stuff, and I guess there definitely are some hazards to think about there. So who wants to jump in first?
Go ahead, Chris.
I was just going to say, I don't know if it's a hazard, but it's only a hazard if you don't let it happen. Is the idea behind Savage Worlds is the fast, furious, fun thing, and then sometimes things explode, and sometimes players do cool things, and it might feel initially a pull to limit that because they're doing too much or they're making too big of an impact. But I mean, it's kind of it's kind of built around that. So you got to kind of let them.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely the hazard there is then like overreacting as a game master, and you know, it can always swing the other way. But that's a good one, Chris. One that I would say is a hazard that I personally came on is it's like you said, it's fast, furious, and fun. So you don't want to lay on, you know, you can get away from yourself like laying on too many custom rules and too many kind of making it kind of more hardcore, right? And that's something that in my Fallout game. So if you guys check it out, I have a lot of optional settings. If I, you know, playing that, I don't recommend people use a lot of the more hardcore settings anymore, because that just doesn't flow with Savage Worlds. So I think you can overdo it as far as like adding on setting rules and adding on like, you know, okay, you're traveling, we got to make sure we track all your food every single day and all your, you know, I think it's just better, just flowing, right, moving on. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think
another one is too.
one of the hazards is just the mindset. I think, Chris, you're talking about that is new players coming in who are expecting a certain style of game. You need to bring them in and help them kind of find their legs, because there are things like meta currency, which you don't generally have in a lot of games, where they can spend bennies. So you may have to ask them, do you want to roll again? Do you want to do better? Spend a benny. You can do that. Cards for initiative are one of the best parts. So I'll kind of spread across. But one of the best parts, I think, is cards for initiative, where you get a new card each round. You've got edges that can benefit you and help you make that. But some people just don't get it. And so you got to help them understand that it's not just initiative roll with a bonus and then that's where you get to go and that's just the way it is. No, you take it. You get to go first next round possibly and get a joker, even though you went last this round. And, you know, it adds a little flavor and you just got to bring them along. I think it's really just breaking people's mindset is one of the things that helps. That's a hazard that you have to go through. And, you know, Little Hawk, again, for the Tabletop Tango, if you want some kind of new GM advice, there's 2 episodes, 69 and 159, that try to give a little bit of advice there for new GMs playing the game. So other than hazards, what's the best parts? Oh, go ahead.
I have more on that.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, more hazards.
And I want to quickly jump on what you said specifically about the mindset. And another huge one is with support and tests too. That's a huge part of the game, and I think a lot of new players coming in from D&D and all those other ones don't really understand that and the openness of it, of how you can kind of sell any skill and, you know, leverage your skills in that way. And so a lot of players, when they're creating characters, might think that they have to have combat stuff. And I, like, with a lot of new players, I'm constantly being like, when you have new players coming in as a game master, you have to be like, you don't need to make a combat character. You can make a smart, sciencey character who during combat also maybe supports or just tests and doesn't do combat. And really getting players to understand that they can then utilize, even not just, you know, they can utilize their science skill sometimes to support or test, but they can utilize, like, you know, persuasion or taunt or performance or intimidation. Like, they can utilize those skills in combat. That's a huge one, I think, to get players behind.
Lots of options.
I have a couple more hazards, but I think Chris has another one. I think
I forgot my other one, but I'm going to build on that, what you said about the supporting and the testing and stuff. A lot of people who come from another system, like say 5e or something, are used to just like everybody's like their own thing, and they're going to go out and they're just going to do the most damage on their own. But I think Savage Worlds works far better when you add your bonuses up by, like, I'm supporting, this guy's testing, I'm doing this, and then you can overcome this toughness or parry or whatever it is you're trying to do because you're working as a team. And if you don't, it can be quite a hindrance, to not do that.
For sure. Yeah. Another hazard I would say for you to look out for, with a lot of players, because when you're just playing with the basic book and you start from novice, you will get a lot of players feeling very samey with a lot of things. If there's like 2 melee characters, they can really, really, really easily feel samey. So we've actually had a couple of videos where we talk about, adding in extra edges, adding in, starting at seasoned, things like that. There's ways that you can get around that to give players more, once you start playing with a group, it's very easy to like fall into that samey kind of feeling and not having enough options from the beginning to really feel like your characters go beyond that. Now, things like Savage Pathfinder, right, it makes it easy to do away with that because you have your class edge. So yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah. Definitely something to consider there. So So what are the best parts? I mean, come on, there's so many good parts. What are the best
Yeah,
parts?
I have more hazards too, but yeah, there is also a lot of good parts. Just yeah, I mean, I would say some of the best parts when we're talking about combat, you brought up initiative, which is huge. I think also no hit point pools. Wound mechanics are awesome. They're so much better for players, for game masters. I mean, it's one of the most brilliant parts of the system. Honestly, I think is the wound mechanics of, everybody has 3 wounds unless they're really, really special, but 3 wounds. And whenever you get wounded, you have minuses and your pace goes down. So it's just a really cool of simulating being injured and also not having to track crazy hit point pools. Because for both creatures and for people, hit point pools are stupid. It's not good. That's not good. I also love the ability to write custom content for it. It's so easy. It's so much fun. Creating monsters, like I said, creating ancestries. Even creating once you learn it, you can create powers. You can create, rule. Like it's very easy to write stuff for Savage Worlds. It's probably one of the most easy and rewarding. That's why there's so many settings.
I would like to add too that maybe this doesn't translate to the VTT as much, but at the table. Savage Worlds has a lot of like tactile stuff, like bennies, cards. You don't see as many people just playing on their phone because they're too busy with all their things and keeping them present at the game. I think that's one of the best parts of Savage Worlds.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, with the the bennies that you can kind of play, and we talked about this I think in Mastering the RPG way back when, where it's like I'm much better in person with bennies because I can feel them and hold them, and then I just can toss them. Versus on a VTT, it's I got to remember to click the plus button or tell someone, well give yourself a benny because it's too much work to go hit the plus button. So yeah, I think it's a package that's got a lot of interesting stuff. First, there's bennies and meta currency. There's initiative using cards. You get to use all your dice, except for maybe the D20, which is kind of funny. But you get to use all your dice. So if you're good at something, you might have a D10, or you might get to roll a D4 for something else. And so you get to use all your dice, which, come on, D20s get boring just to roll a D20 every time.
If you're not using your D20 enough, you're probably forgetting your fear checks. So
yeah, if your setting uses fear, then definitely the D20 comes into effect. So good point. So the D20 is in there. See, so every die is used. But it just kind of comes together as a package of a lot of interesting things that I think some games just, and then like you mentioned, tests and support, and you can do crazy things in combat. If you can explain why it's happening and what skill you're using, you can do it. And then all the extra things like dramatic tasks and quick encounters, they layer on top of this, and you just get a very interesting combination of stuff that just kind of works really well. It's not perfect. We talked about the hazards, right? Some people don't like exploding dice. Some people feel like it's too pulpy, whatever. But it's comes together in a package that has a lot of interesting elements that are just kind of fun to play with, I think. So that's why I like it.
And the hazards are not necessarily like drawbacks of the system. They're just things I think we've found that are kind of, like you could run into problems, right? Because of X or because of Y. I think one of the main traits of Savage Worlds for this person specifically, even if you just want to play riffs, like once you learn the core rules, and like we've talked about a million times, there's so many settings, and also companion books. Those are things like the science fiction companion, the fantasy companion. Once you learn the rules, you don't have to learn a million other rules to then play a crazy Wild West game. You don't have to learn a new set of rules to then play, Apocalypse with robots or whatever. Or then you don't have to learn other rules to play super villains, trapped by aliens. Like once you learn the rules, you can play all those settings. And when you're using like well-written settings and the companion books, they do feel different, right? I mean, it's still Savage Worlds, but they feel different enough that you get a different, like you can really feel those settings. So I think for somebody like me who loves to play different types of games, and I still like to play other games besides Savage Worlds, that one of the biggest strengths is that, like when Carl will play, we started with Cyberpunk, and then we did like a, kind of a post-apocalypse 17th century Victorian era, and then we played a weird science fiction game, and then we played a fantasy game, so it's like him, like he likes to jump and do all these different settings, and we're using different books all the time. So to me, that's probably the number one strength, honestly.
I
Very
have
cool.
a small anecdote about this. Is my first Savage Worlds game was a Savage Rifts game, and I spent some time to make my character who was like a psychic vine melter or something, but I didn't quite understand the levels that Rifts was at. So the first thing we encountered was like this mech that was like a AT-AT walker or something, and I got hit with a missile and I died like that first thing that happened. I was like, oh, this game
Failed that
sucks.
bleed out roll.
I hate this game. Yeah.
Did you declare Blaze of Glory? Come on, you should have declared Blaze of Glory.
I'm sure I didn't remember that they had that. Yeah.
That's a setting rule in
there's
Rifts,
another.
though.
They have the Blaze of Glory in Rifts. Yeah.
That's
There's
what I'm saying. There is a setting rule in Rifts called Blaze of Glory. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that is a good, Chris, that's a really good hazard. I think we've talked about Savage Worlds being swingy for players. It can also be swingy for GM. I've seen the weakest person like literally throw like, I forget what it was. It was like a piece of garbage basically and exploded and the person died, you know? Like it's not that it's so deadly. I don't think it's not like a super deadly system, but it can be, I guess, from anybody. Because there's no CR, you know, well, usually it isn't. There's always those times where the random little weakest person can kill you, you know, just because of some bad rolls. I think that's a good hazard, is that you have to prep people for that, I think.
Yeah. In Savage Worlds, even a peasant with a pitchfork can take out a hero. That's how I like to say it. So, all right, well, cool. So that was question number 5. That's the last question we have. Hey, thanks guys for being on this special episode. Thank you, Richard, for that set of questions that I think was applicable for many, many people. And we'll thank you for, hopefully you'll watch this and say, hey, I'm listening to it on Mastering RPG. Wouldn't it be cool to check out Tabletop Tango, and hopefully vice versa? We like doing this. It's fun and great questions, and play some Savage Worlds. Talk to you later. Bye.
Happy gaming.